Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome once again to the WP Builds podcast. This is episode number 304, entitled Steve Burge on running PublishPress and buying other plugins. It was published on Thursday the 17th of November 2023. My name's Nathan Wrigley and I'll be joined in a few short minutes by Steve so that we can have our chat. But before then, a few bits of housekeeping. The first thing is, well, Black Friday is around the corner and we now have over 115, count them, 115 deals on the WP Builds Black Friday page. The URL for that is the ever so easy to remember wpbuilds.com/black. One more time, wpbuilds.com/black. And if you go to that page, you'll find a searchable, filterable list. I suggest that you bookmark it. And then during the run-up to Black Friday, you can visit there for all of your WordPress needs. We've tried to only put deals on there which are related to WordPress, so it's plugins, themes, hosting, blocks, and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a few SaaS platforms which overlap as well. One more time, wpbuilds.com/black. The next one to mention is our awards page, wpbuilds.com/awards. It's a fun and rather silly way of gaining money for Big Orange Heart, the charity in the WordPress and remote working space, looking to help people with all sorts of needs. You can go there and you can vote, and you are guaranteed, if you pay $20 to Big Orange Heart and send me your receipt for that donation, I will guarantee you a win on our awards page. Like I say, it's a bit of fun, it's a bit silly, but go and nominate yourself, go and nominate somebody else in any category of your choosing, and you will be guaranteed a win. The final thing to mention is our wpbuilds.social. Yes, that's a URL, wpbuilds.social. It's our Mastodon install. Now, if I'd have said the word Mastodon to you about 3 months ago, the chances are you'd never have heard of it. Now, it seems like you can't possibly avoid the word Mastodon. What with all that's happening over on Twitter at the moment, a lot of people have decided to move their social media, aka Twitter account, over to Mastodon. We have been hosting a Mastodon install for well over a year and a half, and it's free. You can sign up, wpbuilds.social, and we're going to try to keep it going, hopefully, into the future, and you'll be able to use our instance as a way of interacting with any other instance on the internet. So come and join us. Hopefully, you'll be able to gain some benefit from using an open source platform like Mastodon. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by going to go.me/WP Builds. Once more, go.me/WP Builds. And we really, truly, sincerely thank GoDaddy Pro for their continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, what have we got on the podcast for you today? Well, we've got Steve Burge. I met Steve for the first time at WordCamp US a few weeks ago. Steve is currently the owner of PublishPress, amongst some other things. For example, he's recently bought the MetaSlider plugin. But we spend quite a lot of the conversation today talking about his journey in open source software, from OS training, Drupal, Joomla, Magento, WordPress, all sorts of things were on that site. Maybe you're still using it. And then he moved into the WordPress space and has got PublishPress, which is a fabulous plugin. And recently, like I said, he just bought MetaSlider, which is curious at this time. It seems like sliders are in decline, but Steve has his reasons. You're about to discover a very nice, polite, and kind plugin developer. So I hope that you enjoy the podcast. I am joined on the podcast by Steve Burge. How are you doing, Steve?
Hey, great. Thanks, Nathan.
It's nice to have you. Steve and I hooked up for the first time. I'm pretty sure it was the first time. Maybe I'm not correct about that, but we hooked up at WordCamp US, which now is probably about a month ago. And since then, Steve's been in the news. Steve has a plugin called PublishPress, and I would recommend that we're going to talk about that a little bit later. It's at PublishPress.com, but he also bought something over the last couple of weeks, and that's kind of half of what we're going to talk about. He's bought a slider plugin. So we're going to talk about the acquisition landscape a bit and why he bought it, and also PublishPress. But before we get into that, Steve, it's a dreadfully banal question, but we ask it pretty much all the time anyway. Give us a potted history. How is it that you ended up creating plugins for WordPress?
This is probably my third career. I've been a big believer of doing something for maybe 8-10 years and then moving on to something new. And my first career was as a regular teacher. Worked in middle schools, high schools, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I probably would still be doing it now if it could actually pay the bills. But as soon as I had wife, kids, and mortgage, then suddenly being a teacher, particularly where I was living in the south of the United States in Georgia, being a teacher just really did not pay the bills. And so I looked around for something else to do. And I'd been dabbling in open source just to make some extra money, really, because I really wasn't making much money as a teacher. And just on my lunch breaks and after school, I kind of kickstarted a business in open source. This was just around 2005, 2006, when WordPress and also Joomla, Drupal, Magento, some other platforms were getting started.
Yeah.
And the niche I quickly found myself in was using my teaching skills to teach people how to use those platforms.
Huh, nice.
So first 10 years or so as a teacher, then we built a training company called OS Training. And for a long time, we did live training. We would fly up to Washington, D.C. and help some government agencies help their staff adapt open source. We would do training classes for them. And we did online video, we did some books, collaborated with a bunch of people, probably published close to 20 different books. If you go on Amazon, you'll find a bunch of our books on there still. And it got to about the 10-year mark and I felt the itch to keep moving. And so we started reinvesting some of the training money into plugins. We started to see that the training was becoming maybe a little more commoditized. Platforms like Udemy were getting really popular, and also the part that I enjoyed most was the in-person training, actually physically going and teaching people face to face.
Right. And
that more or less disappeared. Even before the pandemic, it disappeared with online video. And I remember going to one training class. Some big semiconductor company flew us out to Silicon Valley, and I was there for a week. I walked into the room ready to teach all their staff, and the staff were on a video call in India.
Oh, wow.
They were calling in. They'd flown me all the way out there to do a glorified Zoom meeting. And I stood in front of that Zoom meeting for a week. And at the end, I walked out and said, okay, it's time to do something else. I don't want to be doing Zoom training forever. And so we started dabbling in the plugin space. And it takes a while to understand the gaps in the market, understand the different leverage points. And after a couple of years of experimenting, we sold some of the plugins we were working on and ended up focusing on publishing plugins. We came to realize that although WordPress is sold to publishers and to writers, it really lacks a lot of essential publishing tools. especially for teams, for more than one person writing a blog. To give you an example, one of our most popular plugins now is a plugin which will simply unpublish your post on a future date.
I use this.
PublishPress Future is the name of it.
Yeah, I use it. I used it today.
Oh,
it's
wonderful.
fabulous. It's completely reliable.
Every other platform we've ever used has that feature built into the core.
Yes.
And so why it's not in WordPress, I don't know. But we spent increasingly more time with WordPress and started to see those gaps, and I started to build our plugins to fill them in. And so we specialize now in plugins which are really for teams. One of probably our fastest growing plugin now is an authors plugin, which allows you to attach 5, 6, 7 different authors to a post.
Yeah. Let's get onto the whole PublishPress angle a little bit later, because we've got this whole slider business to talk about. But just before then, OS training. I had a subscription. I say had because I haven't touched it in a long time. I don't know is OS training still a thing? Does it still function even though you're no longer involved?
Yeah, we sold it about 3 years ago to actually a lady who was in WordCamp San Diego with us. Robbie is her name.
Uh-huh.
And she taught with us for a good number of years. We knew her from a long time back, and when it came to sell, she was the ideal candidate. She had been working with us for a long time.
Yeah, I got a membership because at the time I was working with largely Magento and Drupal. Really hadn't discovered WordPress, and the materials that I got out of OS training, because it was OS training, open source, that was your speciality, wasn't it? You covered many bases, whereas now, there's lots of specific companies that you can go to for education, just for example, around Drupal or around WordPress and so on. So it really appealed to me because I hadn't really stuck my flag in the sand with WordPress yet. I was still fiddling with things. And then when Drupal 7 went to 8, I finally said, no, enough. I can't cope with these website rebuilds just because we've switched version number, and came across WordPress because it had that backwards compatibility component. There was just always that promise to keep things going, regardless of whether it went from WordPress 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 now. Things would potentially, well, in most situations, things would keep working. And I found the promise of that really, really fundamental to my decision to move over to WordPress. That and the fact that it looked attractive, whereas things like Drupal were pretty darn ugly on the back end.
I've got to say that the backwards compatibility is the killer feature. When we launched OS training, we deliberately aimed at covering multiple bases. We did the Magento, we did the Drupal, we did the WordPress, we did Joomla, dabbled in all sorts of things, and one by one, those platforms killed themselves off with major updates.
Yep.
Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, it was an entirely different platform.
Yeah.
It had the same name, but the code base was 100% different. Magento 1 to Magento 2 just blew the audience away.
Yeah.
Joomla's done the same thing in the past. And WordPress has become the dominant platform, become a monoculture because of backwards compatibility. It's kept everyone on board.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've obviously gone through something over the last, well, let's say 2.5 years, roughly speaking, where it feels like Gutenberg was kind of like the Drupal 8 moment for WordPress, where things suddenly became very different, and the ability to code in React was suddenly a thing, and various other bits and pieces. Anyway, we're sort of a bit of an aside there, but yeah, fascinating. Really a fabulous product in its day. Like I said, if it's still going, I wish them well. But you've moved on, and you're now doing PublishPress. Just to that point, did you, when you stepped away from OS training and decided you only said the word plugin, does that imply that you exclusively work with WordPress? Because over on the Drupal side, they were called modules, and I don't know what they were called on the Joomla side. But are you just WordPress now?
We do have a legacy business in the Joomla space that still has 2 staff members. Both Drupal and Joomla and Magento to some extent are still just ticking along.
Yeah.
Probably at maybe 20% of where they had been in the past.
Yeah.
But we are at 2 people on the Joomla side and about 10 on the WordPress side now.
Okay. Yeah, that gives us an idea. Yeah.
And the growth rates are vastly different. We're PublishPress growing 50, 60% year on year, whereas our Joomla business is just steadily declining.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so during the intervening month since I was with you in San Diego, some news popped up the other week about the acquisition. We've heard about acquisitions over the last 3 years almost endlessly. Seems like that news has dried up. It was almost one a week, and then there's a little bit of a hiatus. And then suddenly I learned that you, PublishPress, had acquired MetaSlider. Now, curiously, and I hope I don't put my foot in it here, Steve, it seems to me that sliders have well, rewind the clock 10 years, they were all the rage, right? Everybody was putting sliders on their websites, and slowly as time has gone on, maybe to say that they're less popular now than they were 10 years ago for a whole variety of reasons. So it seems like a curious thing for you to buy, and I just want you to spell out what your thought process was. Buying a plugin called MetaSlider, which you can find if you just Google it, but MetaSlider is spelled exactly as you'd imagine, .com. What were you thinking?
Well, to some extent, to get a head start, you have to be willing to do things that other people may not be. And so I think quite a lot of people took a look at this when it was available for sale and turned their nose up for exactly that reason.
Right.
But sliders are still surprisingly resilient, particularly among people that will build their own websites. There's still the demand, still the audience there. If you go through a web designer, the web designer may try to persuade you out of it. But there's a big audience of people who build their own websites who still want a slider. So the plugin has 700,000 installs.
Good grief. Wow. Huh. Okay. That's all I needed to know. That's astonishing. Wow. Okay.
So, reasons why we brought it. One, the number of people that actually use slideshows is vastly underestimated. That there's a lot of users out there who still want them on their website, even if people who do it professionally like us may no longer think they're cool. So the audience is still there, and the way we've approached building PublishPress, and also a third leg to our business called TaxoPress, which deals with taxonomies and organizing and categorizing content in WordPress, is we've taken a suite approach. So PublishPress has 9 plugins at the moment, which really attack similar problems from the same angle. And TaxoPress, and I'm going to break a little news for you here, is shortly going to add more than just the main plugin. We have an acquisition that's about ready to go over there, plus 1 or 2 extra features.
Nice.
And with MetaSlider, we very much envision it being a suite of image plugins. So if you install MetaSlider, the previous owners have a photo gallery that is in a beta version. There's a lightbox, a modal plugin that comes with it. And so PublishPress, we've had a suite of multiple plugins which all attack the problems of publishing in WordPress. And with MetaSlider, we very much intend to tackle image problems in WordPress.
When you obviously decided you were going to at least look into this, did you have conversations with the owners at the time and get to the root of what was going on with them? Was there a particular reason? Had they, despite the fact that there may be 700,000 people having installed it, was it more of a difficult business proposition for them? Were they just, I don't know, maybe working on other things and had lost the mojo to work on this? Just wondering from their point of view why they put it on the market.
Oh, sure. The plugin has a little bit of a complicated history. It was originally owned by the people that do Updraft Plus and WP Optimize.
Got it.
And in fact, if you look at the MetaSlider site, it still has exactly the same brand of orange that you'll see in those other plugins too.
Yeah, I see that now, yeah.
And so I think Updraft Plus is growing really fast and really becoming quite a spectacular business for them. They have a backup vault. Updraft Plus has well over 1 million, maybe 2 million users now.
Good grief.
So they're doing great, and I think MetaSlider was a kind of afterthought for them. And then they sold it to a company called Extendify.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, I'd forgotten that piece, but yeah, I remember it now. Yeah.
Who are doing interesting things with Gutenberg and also with onboarding users. I think they're really aimed now at hosting companies, trying to create a really smooth onboarding experience when you first start WordPress. That you go through their onboarding wizard, you type in what kind of site you want to build, and they will pre-populate everything for you.
Yeah.
And so they'd originally aimed to go more down the Gutenberg line, and so they took on MetaSlider with the idea of incorporating slideshows into Gutenberg and boosting their user base. But they took a bit of a deviation into the onboarding and the full site construction. And so for them too, it became a bit of an afterthought.
And so in steps Steve Burge and decides to take it on. I read an article that Sarah Gooding wrote in The Tavern where she spoke to you. I don't know if that was on a call or via email or whatever it might be. And the usual questions were being asked in terms of what's your future? What are you planning that's going to be different to what was in the past? So forgive me for rehashing that question once again, but just tell us what your intention is. Maybe it's just to keep it exactly as it is, I don't know, or maybe it's to develop it and pull it in a certain direction. Just give us a bit of an insight there.
Oh, sure. Well, if you install it, there is the photo gallery that's in beta. So we will flesh that out. And my hope is that the slideshow will keep on going strong. But within, say, 2 or 3 years, there will be all sorts of associated image products. There'll be a photo gallery. There'll be a very cool modal pop-up plugin, and we'll look for other holes and other features that we can fill into when it comes to the use of images in WordPress. And so the slideshow is kind of the base and will become kind of the leverage point, and then we'll add on all sorts of extra products to it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the 700,000 users, and I guess to some extent I'm in a bit of an echo chamber when I talk to people in WordPress. I'm largely talking to people who've given over their life to WordPress in one way, shape or form. Like you're building plugins. I'm talking to hosting companies. I'm talking to theme developers and so on. And very often I find myself forgetting about probably the typical WordPress user. Maybe the sort of 80, 90, 95% of the user base isn't really interested too much in the technicalities and whether things are cool or all of that kind of stuff. They just want to use WordPress as a conduit to get their content online. And, so the market is there, and let's put all of that stuff to one side. It may not be that they're cool anymore, but a significant proportion of the people aren't even having that conversation. They think it's cool and they're going to jolly well use it.
Oh yeah, I've wasted a lot of time and made a lot of mistakes building things that I thought were cool, rather than what people would actually buy and what end users thought were cool.
I confess I haven't really played with MetaSlider, but there are a few commercial rivals, and I've played with some of those, and it never ceased to amaze me actually the what you could do, because you get this idea that it's a slider, things go left, things go right, there's a little circle icon to indicate you're on 2 out of 5, but they really do a lot more than that, don't they? In many cases they're almost like mini page builders, and they can really throw out some incredibly complicated layouts. And I don't know if MetaSlider is the same, but I'm guessing it's more than just slide left, slide right.
Oh yeah, it got features such as showing all your latest content. You could create a list of all the latest posts on your site, videos. It's far more than a simple old-fashioned slideshow, but really the core is still doing that well because that's what people want. I was talking with a lady yesterday who she runs a small theatre, and she just wants a slideshow on her homepage which will show the current 5 or 6 performances at the theatre.
Yeah.
That will rotate every 10 seconds so people can see them all. And if she hired an expensive web designer, they might say that's a bad idea. But that's what she wants, and it works for her.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, the customer is right, I guess, would be the motif there. Is MetaSlider, is it on the repo? Is there a .org version, or is it just the version that we can find at metaslider.com?
Oh, well, the .org version is the one with the 700,000 installs.
Got it. Okay, so you can search for MetaSlider over in the .org repo. Okay, let's put that conversation to bed. First of all, I hope it's successful.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking to us about that. But the thing that's obviously got you going in this industry and in a position to be able to acquire other things, presumably, is the investment and the returns on that investment that you're getting from PublishPress. This is one of those plugins that I kind of feel is kind of under the radar, but really important if you're a team. And you can find it at PublishPress.com. There's no weirdness there. It's exactly as you'd imagine. Just tell us, I mean, you've illustrated a little bit of what it's for, but give us the sort of 10,000-foot pitch as to what it does, why you built it, and so on and so forth.
Sure. So the background is in some of the government work that I mentioned earlier. We used to do a lot of work for the US government, and they were all on Drupal. And we'd walk into these very big deployments with big teams, and quite often we'd find out that they were not actually willing to or very keen to use Drupal. We'd be teaching them for a few days and they get comfortable with me. And when I sit down with them at lunch or at a break, they'd say things like, why didn't we end up using WordPress for this? And these would be these big US government deployments or big multinational companies. And the answer would come back, well, we looked at WordPress, but it really didn't have any very good user management, access control, multi-user publishing workflows. It was really kind of limited in that sense. And that really got us thinking that these end users had really identified a key problem in WordPress, that the publishing workflows, the people that really care about their content, particularly those who are forced to care about it. We did some work with some big pharmaceutical companies where if they publish the wrong thing, they've got a lawsuit in their future.
Yeah.
And they really cared about making sure the approval processes were good, making sure that the steps they went through before publishing content were accurate, and they wanted a record of who had done what. Basically, all sorts of problems that emerge once you have more than just 1 or 2 people writing. writing content on your site. These companies might have multiple people from multiple different departments all collaborating together, and they had analyzed WordPress, kicked the tires on it, and found that it was lacking. And so that was kind of the space that people were telling us existed in WordPress. And so PublishPress is really aimed at that space, at teams. There's about 9 plugins now, and they all do different things around allowing people to collaborate or control what people can do on a WordPress site around publishing.
Yeah, do you know what? It's fascinating. If you've never used a different CMS and you have simply used WordPress, it is really remarkable. I do remember the first time I seriously opened WordPress and thought, okay, I'm going to dedicate some serious time to this. I remember thinking time and again, why can't it do this? Why can't it do that? And the granularity of things in Drupal. So as an example, it was totally possible it came into core. There was this module, which is what Drupal called plugins, basically. There was one called views, and it was this astonishingly powerful engine to create different displays and layouts and poll the database and pull things out. And you could do it all in a GUI. And, this is decades ago now. And also the capability to have the permissions model in Drupal was just fabulous. I mean, in the end, it was a very confusing list of tick boxes. But whenever you threw something into Drupal, let's say you added a capability via a module, that would then introduce capabilities for things like, well, are you going to allow other people on the site to use this? If they've got a certain user role, yes, they can. And if they don't have a certain user role, no, they can't. And user roles were completely baked into core. With the click of a button, you could invent a new user and assign them all these different permissions. And I remember coming to WordPress and thinking, where is it all? Like, literally, where is it? And of course, it isn't. It's just simply not there. And so I never thought really about that too much, but bravo for you figuring out that somebody needed to do it.
I didn't really figure it out. We were told.
Because they're the best decisions when somebody instructs you on what you need to do. Yeah, that's great. So essentially,
these people we're talking to,
sorry, you carry on. I apologize.
I was going to say the people that we were talking to really hated using Drupal.
Yep.
But it had these features that they wanted.
It was difficult to use. There was this giant matrix of tick boxes, which really was, by the time you scrolled down to like the 50th row of tick boxes. Do you remember this? Like the 50th row of tick boxes, and there were like 8 different user roles all spread out in front of you. You think, which one wants what? I've completely forgotten. So it did get a bit overwhelming. But it was brilliant at the same time. You really could build up teams of different people with different capabilities in a default version of Drupal. Anyway, this is not Drupal builds. This is WP builds. So PublishPress aims to tackle a lot of that heavy lifting. You say there's 9 plugins. I'm currently looking at the website, and I can see 8. And I'm going to just name them all, and then maybe if you can identify the missing one. We've got PublishPress authors. Basically, all of them are prefaced by the word PublishPress, so I'm not going to say that over and over again. Authors, blocks, capabilities, checklists. There's just PublishPress, which I guess is the sort of root of it all. I'm guessing you need that for any of the others to work.
The original.
Yeah. Permissions, revisions, and series. And then, so this is on the homepage, publishpress.com. You can see them all. These are just different components that you can add in on top of PublishPress. Is that how it works? If you want to be able to create user roles and capabilities for those, you'd need to add in, I don't know, the capabilities. Sorry, I'm now halfway in Magento, halfway in Drupal, and halfway in WordPress. Are these plugins that you add in order to gain those capabilities?
No, they all tackle slightly different problems. The one that's missing is the future one that we talked about earlier, that will unpublished content on a particular date in the future.
Got it.
And we don't have a pro version of that yet. So that's why it's not listed on the site. But For example, authors will add more than one author to a single post. Revisions allows you to make a copy of published content and then take it through an approval process before republishing it again. Checklists allows you to have a list of items that must be complete before content is published. So all images have to have an alt tag. You have to have a minimum number of words, things like that. Capabilities allows you to have access control. Basically, basically, if you install it, you get the big
you get the big matrix,
the big list of the big list of checkboxes that we talked about. And so they're all separate plugins, but they all basically tackle that the same type of problem: how to handle having a lot of users on your site.
Do you know what's fascinating? I'm looking at this, and my eye is being drawn, for reasons that I don't quite understand. My eye is being drawn to checklists. I basically do the WP Builds website. I mean, it's just me. There's no real team going on in the background, and so a lot of the things like multiple authors and permissions for those authors and all of that kind of stuff is moot for me. But I can well imagine where the use case for that would be really critical. But whenever I publish anything on WP Builds, I go through this checklist in my head. And it involves all of the things that you've just described. Have I uploaded a featured image? Yes. Has it got an alt tag? Yes. Have I assigned a category to it? Yes. Is there at least one taxonomy assigned to it? You get the idea, right? I go through this checklist, and in my case, I sometimes forget, and I publish it, and a couple of days later, I think, I forgot to add in the YouTube video that was supposed to go there, and I have to go back and I have to amend it. So that I think that's got potential for me, just me, because it will prevent me from publishing things that I know shouldn't be published.
Well, you know what? That plugin is the absolutely perfect example of what we talked about earlier with end users. We've acquired quite a few plugins over the years, plugins that have proven to be popular, and checklists was one that we built from scratch, and I thought it was cool for exactly the reasons you described. And whenever I would talk to anyone in the WordPress business, they would say, that's cool, just like you did. That's exactly what I need. And you know what? It's by far our least popular plugin.
That's great. We're obviously in a minority. We both think it's really cool. That's brilliant. But okay, so
yeah,
I can well imagine that a hybrid of all of these different plugins that you've got. One of the big properties that I read that I know is on WordPress, for example, is TechCrunch. Now, I've no idea what the number of staff in TechCrunch is, but basically they don't make mistakes. If a post comes out, maybe the wording is wrong and they've made some error in grammar and what have you. But they you don't see a post without a featured image. You don't see a post without some taxonomy attached to it. And there's no way that's by accident. So they must have some sort of editorial process. And I love the idea of, I don't know, you've got the editor-in-chief. You could create that capability in PublishPress, and presumably you could assign tasks so that junior writers, new writers, they can do certain things. They could write text and they can perhaps save it as a draft, but they can't finally publish it. This is the idea, right? You get this complex mesh of different capabilities for different people, so that ultimately something that shouldn't be published because it goes against the guidelines of the company, the SOP, it can't be published. Is that basically what you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. That is probably the most complex use case, because doing something like that does take quite a lot of effort to build and manage. So that's at the higher end of what we do. I mean, a lot of people will install our plugins just for something far simpler, such as having a little checklist of items to do on the side of their post, or just being able to unpublish content on a future date. But we've very deliberately aimed what we do at that more enterprise, the more, I was going to say high quality, that's probably the wrong word. Definitely aimed at the people who have more complicated requirements. And so you mentioned some famous users on the front of the site. That's kind of deliberate. I got some advice from Josh at Pagely when we were getting started, and he was very much adamant about aiming at the top right segment of the market,
Right.
at the people who can pay more. And to this day, he probably gave me that advice 5 years ago. To this day, I don't think anyone has ever complained about the price of our plugins, simply because we're aiming at the audience for which 150 or $200 a year is ridiculously cheap.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the other one that's drawing my eye is PublishPress blocks. Tell us about that, because that looks interesting. I'll just give you give the audience the high profile, the 10,000 foot high version. It says, take control of the new Gutenberg editor with user edition profile configuration and 20 plus new blocks and options. Give us a bit of an insight into how this works and why you've decided to create some new blocks and not just use all the core blocks.
Well, blocks is one of those ones that probably falls into the category of doing something that is a little too cool. The blocks plugin market is very busy. There's just about everyone has a Gutenberg plugin with lots of different options.
Yeah.
And we've been developing ours over the last year or so to focus on more general items. So at the moment, you can control which blocks, including the core blocks, which blocks people are able to see. So you can remove blocks from editors or remove blocks from contributors, for example. And we're moving towards adding much more general publishing controls for blocks. Just about every blocks plugin has it's like a souped up image block, or maybe a testimonial block or things like that. And so that was probably one of the things where we misjudged slightly. And we're maneuvering that plugin to add more general access controls for blocks.
Yeah, block locking and the user permissions model is kind of a new thing, isn't it? In 6.2, I believe, at some point we're going to get more granular control of all of these kind of things. And I really feel that's a missing piece, and it fits right into what you're doing. So at the moment, anybody who's got the capability to go into a page or a post can sort of fiddle and delete things accidentally. And it seems like there's a real groundswell of support for the idea that, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could create a capability and, I don't know, they can add a title block, or they can edit the title but they can't remove it, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm completely wedded to the block editor now. I use it for more or less everything. So yeah, interesting. I kind of see this as the approach in the future. And I don't know how granular WordPress core's locking capabilities are going to be. I think, maybe it'll just be that you can drag things in and delete things and maybe edit things. But I'm wondering if yours goes a little bit further. So, for example, do you have things like a certain user role might have the capability to, I don't know, edit a title, but the title then goes into like a draft status until it's been approved by somebody higher up the food chain?
No, everything that we do at the moment works on the post level.
Okay. Yeah.
So you could edit the post, change the title, and then submit the change for approval.
Got it.
But it would be the whole post, and
right,
not just the block.
Right. Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. So okay. You mentioned pricing. You mentioned that you are fairly solid with your pricing. You're happy with it. I don't see the pricing on the website. Maybe that I'm just missing it. Give us a rundown of where we are in October 2022. What's the prices of all the various different bits and pieces of PublishPress?
Oh, it's about $130 for the entire suite of the Pro plugins.
Nice.
Or you can buy them individually too.
I see. I've just found the buy now button, which obviously was lurking there the entire time. I got it. Okay. So let's be clear. So there's 3 plans that I can see. There's a business plan, $129 a year, and it's got various limitations in terms of 1 team member. Then there's an agency plan at $249, 3 team members, And then there's unlimited, where you can have up to 10 team members, but they all seem to carry all of the blocks with them. Each of the plan carries the same amount of things. The business plan, the more affordable one, is 1 site. The agency is 5 sites. And then the unlimited plan, guess what? It's unlimited number of sites. So, okay, there we go. Thank you. I found it finally.
Yeah, it's an entirely free/pro system. When we did that initial dabbling when we started in the plugin business, we tried on different approaches such as add-ons, where you'd get the free plugin, and when you joined, you would get separate add-ons to install. But we found that to be very messy, and people would look at a list of 60 add-ons and they had no idea which ones to install.
Yeah.
And so we ended up selling those plugins that use that model, and everything we do is either you have the free version or the pro version installed.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice and clear. So you're going to be looking at PublishPress.com if anything has interested you today. That's all the questions I've got for you, Steve. Firstly, just before we wrap it up, tell us where, apart from PublishPress.com, are you available on socials? Do you like receiving email? Do you want to let our our listeners know any places that they might find you?
Oh, sure. SteveBurge.com is probably the best place to drop me an email, and that has my socials on as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, good luck with MetaSlider, and obviously, luck is not needed, but continued success with PublishPress. Steve Burge, thanks for chatting to me today.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Nathan.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed the podcast. Lovely chatting to Steve Burge today, all about the many things that he has been doing in the open source world in the recent past. Lovely, lovely chat. Obviously, it goes without saying, if you want to contact Steve, that would be really nice. But also, if you've got any commentary that you want to add to the post, head over to wpbuilds.com, search for episode number 304, and leave us a comment there. And if it concerns Steve, I can always forward it to him. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place. Invoice clients and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by going to go.me/WP Builds. And we really do thank GoDaddy Pro for their continued support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, remember our Black Friday page, wpbuilds.com/black, our awards page, wpbuilds.com/awards, and our Mastodon install, wpbuilds.social. Join us there. If none of those appeal to you, well, why don't you join us next week for another podcast episode? You can subscribe at wpbuilds.com. There's a form right on the front of the website which you can subscribe to. And if you enjoy WordPress news, join us for our weekly show, This Week in WordPress, 2 p.m. UK time. It'll be at wpbuilds.com/live. Have a great week. I'm going to fade in some cheesy music. Bye-bye for now.